Welcome, everyone. This is the first public consultation meeting for Our Plan Toronto, so thank you for joining us today. I'm going to open the meeting with a land acknowledgement. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Through Our Plan Toronto, the city is committed to furthering efforts towards truth and reconciliation and raising Indigenous voices in planning and bringing forward Indigenous perspectives. You'll hear later on in the presentation a bit more about the consultation program and engagement that also includes the outreach and meetings with Indigenous rights holders as well as Indigenous organizations. With that, we'd actually like to welcome Deputy Mayor Bai Lau and the Chief Planner for the City of Toronto, Greg Lintern, to make some opening remarks. So we'll start with Mayor Bai Lau, or Deputy Mayor Bai Lau, and hand it over to you, and then over to Greg after that.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to start by thanking everybody that is taking some time out of their schedules today to join us, to listen to the presentation, and most importantly, to give us your feedback and your opinions. Our Plan Toronto is the city's exercise in reviewing the official plan and the policies that will help shape the next 30 years of growth. The opportunity to engage in this comprehensive review of our policies comes along every 5 years. So here we are. And once again, thank you to all of you for participating. This opportunity we have here today after having undergone an immense trial of a global pandemic that shifted the ways that we work, that we engage with people, and make our way around the city is something special. In charting the course for our next 30 years, this moment moves us to incorporate lessons learned from the pandemic in order to ensure greater equity, justice, and resilience in what we do as a city, but also to plan for the future city that we want. So Toronto is fortunate to be in a position to plan for growth. This demonstrates to us that there is confidence in the city for investment, and people will continue to choose Toronto as their home. But we can't take that for granted. And in the midst of greater investment and continued growth, our plan must also address the needs of the most vulnerable in our communities, the workers that need and we want to continue to live in our city. And for that, we need to address the affordable housing crisis that we're experiencing today. We need to make sure that we're taking in consideration the supports and services needed for complete communities, which also includes jobs across the city. We also need to address the climate crisis so that we're growing in a way that is sustainable and moves Toronto to a low carbon city. Our Plan Toronto is an important initiative that goes beyond minimum density targets. We're charting our future, your future, and the future of those who are not here yet. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today. Planning staff are here to help answer questions. So please use the chat room and engage with us. We are looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Councillor Bai Lau. We are also having some opening remarks from the Chief Planner, Greg Lintern. Greg, if you can go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to share this kickoff event for Our Plan Toronto. I know a lot of conversations have been happening already online and in the media and in small groups, so it's great to be able to come together and have an afternoon discussion, and later today an evening discussion about our plan. Just building on the Deputy Mayor's remarks, I've been asking myself, we've been hearing this Build Back Better business through the course of the pandemic, and I really think this is an opportunity for us to dig into what we mean by better. We talk about it, but what do we actually mean? Our Plan Toronto is an opportunity to have a say in how we as a city address all of these challenges that face us today, looking at reducing the disparities that are experienced by Torontonians and by newcomers to the city, planning for the highest quality of life for all ages, for all people, for all abilities, integrating Indigenous reconciliation into the land use framework, something that's, I think, really interesting and very timely for a lot of people. As we grow, as I said, we've been learning from the pandemic, and we know that some communities, traditionally, the unevenness of growth and change in Toronto is being played out in more and felt more by some people. So those disparities, when it comes to being underserved for parks, for open space, for childcare, recreation centers, all those other things that make your communities complete. Today, we're going to hear from staff, we're going to hear from consultants on the team about the process of reviewing the official plan and what actually goes into writing and putting the words into these policies. I think they become very meaningful in people's lives, and it is an important moment. It's a provincially required exercise, which all municipalities in the Greater Toronto Area are undertaking right now. We need to have an open mind about where we want to be in 2051, and I'd ask all of you to share and have a conversation about values and about aspirations and goals. It's kind of, in a way, kind of a fun moment for people to weigh in and play planner, if you will, around the kind of city that we want. I often think about Michael Ondaatje's 1987 book, The Skin of a Lion, and he wrote in part about the Bloor Viaduct over the Don Valley. And there's a line in there that I've played back many times in my career around imagining the city that you want before you actually build it. So before we actually continue to build, continue to evolve Toronto, we need to spend some time imagining where we want to be, and that's what this process is about. It's about how we talk about the future, how we shape the choices that we want to make, the kind of city that we want for our children, for future generations, and certainly for people who aren't here yet. So as the Deputy Mayor indicated, it's an important conversation to have. The team is all ears, really excited to hear from people today, and I hope you enjoy the afternoon.
Great, thank you very much. So with that, I'd also like to introduce the other folks that are on the line. I'm not going to have everyone introduce themselves because we have quite a few people here. But I do want to let everyone know who is in the background. So the city planning team is here. We have city planning team members who are responsible for the whole official plan review and completing and undertaking all of the work around the review of the official plan that you're going to hear about today. We also have subject matter experts, so people who are specializing in a specific area of the official plan and a specific area of policy within the city, so housing or natural environment and climate change, etc. So our hope is that while we have the meeting, we will have lots of time for our discussion, but we also encourage you to use the chat, and the team, the city planning team that's here, can answer questions as we go and try to direct you to right locations if you're looking for more information. We also have our full consultation team. So my name is Marilise Willemse, and I work at Dillon Consulting, and we're assisting the city with kind of managing and completing a lot of the outreach and the consultation for this program. We have a number of people from our team on the line as well who are documenting everything, and a big part of our role is to document and make sure that all of the range of opinions are heard and understood by the city as they go through this process. So lots of people to help manage and be part of this conversation. And then, of course, everyone from the public. So thank you for joining us, and we're happy to have this conversation today. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Throughout the meeting, we are going to be using the comment box instead of the Q&A box. You may traditionally be used to that Q&A box. We like the comment box because it allows everyone to see and have a dialogue amongst each other, the conversation. It's not all hidden in the background and you don't know who's asking what or what the questions are. With that, we ask that you be respectful in the conversation, and I'll get to that a bit more on that in a moment. As I noted, the staff are here to answer any questions that they can directly through the chat as well as through our conversation. I will let you know when we have a dedicated pause point for conversation, and we can use the raise hand function, and I'll show you how to do that when that time comes. As I noted right at the beginning, we actually had technical challenges right off the top. So I just want to note to please be patient with us. We're doing our best in these virtual meetings, and sometimes things come up. We have tech problems, so we'll, as much as possible, try to troubleshoot through those. We are using the polls feature today, so we're going to do a little test in a moment to make sure that everyone knows where the poll function is so that they can participate. As you may have seen when you logged in, this meeting is being recorded. It will be part of the public record, and we will use it as part of managing and recording our documentation for this. And then I noted I am going to facilitate the conversation tonight. So also in terms of the dialogue that we have back and forth with all of the city experts that are on the line today. So with that, a few participant guidelines. We like to just put these up to remind everyone and also encourage a lot of conversation. We welcome your questions and discussions. There are no bad questions. So we recognize many people are coming to this space from different levels of understanding on a project like this. So feel free to ask your questions and hopefully we can get those answered today. We want to hear from everyone, and we recognize that everyone has wisdom and experience to share, and that those experiences and wisdom may differ. So please be respectful and be open to listening to the different perspectives around the table. We know there are differences in opinion. We've already had some through our stakeholder conversation, and actually this is a big part of what the city needs to work through is figuring out the right balance and the right mix. I do want to note through the use of chat, because it's an open forum and everyone can see, we won't tolerate any abusive or derogatory or discriminatory language. So if we have to close the chat due to any of that, we will step in and do that. We don't want to. So we really encourage you to think about that before you post anything. And then reminding that this is public record, so the chat will be part of our documentation. Everyone's wisdom helps us get to the wisest result. So hopefully you feel comfortable to share. If that is not the case, you don't feel comfortable and you just want to listen for this hour or 2 hours that we have together, then you can always reach out to us after. So in the chat, our team will post the project email, and you're welcome to reach out to us after the meeting and have further conversations if today you just want to sit and listen and share your opinions later. So with that, use of chat, I'm already seeing lots of folks getting in there and writing already. So just a reminder, if you're on a cell phone, you'll see the middle image. The chat, you get to that by pressing the 3 white buttons at the bottom of your screen, and then you'll see a chat with everyone function. You'll also see the polling function there, so we'll get to that in a minute. And then the raised hand function is at the very top of that, the features selection panel that you can use. If you're on a tablet or a laptop or computer, you'll have 3 little white buttons in the bottom right hand corner. You can use those buttons and you'll see a chat option. You'll also see the participants tab, so you'll be able to view that. There's a little raise hand highlighted in blue on the screen there that will help you also raise your hand during the conversation. So with that, why don't we start with a poll just to make sure everyone knows where that is and how that functions. Our first poll question is launched now, and the question is, where are you joining us from today? So we have a few options here. We recognize these are big geography options. We weren't going to list the 158 neighborhoods. So Etobicoke, North York, East York, Old Toronto or downtown, Scarborough, or maybe you're joining us from another area outside of that. Your options to access your poll, again, on your computer at the bottom right-hand screen, you'll see 3 little white dots. You click on those and the poll should pop up. Or if you're on your phone, the polling tab will come up at the bottom of your screen if you click on those 3 white tabs. We've had quite a few answers come in so far, so please submit those and we'll close that poll right now and get those answers up. So that'll end in just a moment and we'll publish those answers. Okay. So with that, I'm just going to, I think it's closing in just a moment. And Zara, if you could publish the results, that would be great. Great. Okay, so a large proportion of folks are coming to us from downtown Old Toronto, and then a relatively small split across every other geography in the city. We do encourage you to share broadly. So if you're in those other places like Etobicoke, North York, Scarborough, please share what you learned today with your neighbors, as we'd like to make sure we get lots of diverse opinions from a broad range of geographies across the city. So the agenda today, I'm going to get right into the details. We're going to start with a presentation from Jeff Cantos from City Planning, who's managing the official plan review. It's really on an inform, so get you up to speed on what our Plan Toronto is all about and why it matters. I'll then do a little bit of presentation on reflecting what we've heard so far from the various consultation that we have done, and I'll update you on what those activities have been. We're then going to have a panel discussion with a number of folks from the city who are here, and then we're going to open it up for broader conversation with everyone else. So to start with the inform, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff now, and you just let me know when you want me to change the slide.
Great, thanks, Annalise. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. Okay, why don't we just jump into this, and why does this matter, and what is an official plan? So the official plan is a city planning document that acts as Toronto's roadmap for land use matters. It sets out our long-term vision, and as Greg mentioned earlier, our shared values and policies that help guide decision-making on land development, economic growth, environment, and more. And so it's important that this plan helps us direct where different types of development should and should not go. And so in the next slide, our homework with this is to demonstrate that over the next 30 years, Toronto will be growing by a minimum of 700,000 new residents and a minimum of 450,000 jobs. So this process, this review process, is known as the Municipal Comprehensive Review. And in the next slide, we as planners, we work in a policy-led framework, and it starts up at the top with the Planning Act. So this is written by the province, and the official plan sits somewhere in the middle, below the provincial policy statement, below the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, but above zoning bylaws and other site-specific matters and processes that the city deals with. So there we are, right in the middle. We're reviewing the official plan that we also reviewed back in 2011. And so the provincial requirements for 2051, we have to demonstrate that we have a plan for a minimum forecasted growth, like I said, around 700,000 more people and minimum 450,000 jobs. And this project of ours is to be completed by next year. And there's a bunch of different other components in the review. There's an intensification strategy, an employment study, requests for employment conversions is what they're called, climate change action. I saw something in the chat about hearing about climate adaptability, and this meeting that you're a part of, the engagement strategy that is virtual. In the next slide, a really quick history of from where we came to where we're going. So prior to the amalgamation of Toronto, we had what was called the Metro Plan, when the municipality of Metropolitan Toronto existed, and each former municipality had its own official plan. And when the city amalgamated, we created the 2002 official plan that was adopted by council in 2002 and then approved by what was then known as the Ontario Municipal Board in 2006. And from there, we started a 5-year review in 2011, and we did that review thematically. We looked at heritage policies because the province changed the Ontario Heritage Act. We looked at our employment policies, and we're relooking at them again. We did neighborhood policies, urban design, and we also did focused reviews of our secondary plans in the downtown and in the Young Eglinton Midtown area. And so here we are now. We are charting our course and our future for the next 30 years with our Plan Toronto. In the next slide, so the official plan that we are reviewing, it consists of 7 chapters there in the middle, and we will be introducing a new chapter called on major transit station areas, and I'll get to that in a bit. But some of the preliminary policy matters that we are reviewing as part of this process are, the fundamental principles for a successful city in the earlier chapters of the official plan, some urban structure elements in chapter 2. We're looking at housing. We have colleagues here in the panel portions talk about inclusionary zoning, affordable housing definition, expanding housing options in neighborhoods, and we also have some colleagues from our environmental team to talk about climate change and environmental policies. So some of the requirements that we have to do for the province will be part of our Plan Toronto, but the review continues on other thematic policy matters. And in the next slide, again, so the OP that we're reviewing, when you look at Toronto in terms of our land use breakdown, so on the left is the City of Toronto and the land use designations contained in the official plan. Yellow being neighborhoods, red is mixed use. So on the right, when you express the city in equal 100 city blocks, you'll see that about 19–20% of our cities dedicated to roads, to which we don't put land use designations. About 35% is neighborhoods, 5% is mixed use areas on the bottom, and about 13% are our two different employment designations. So again, this is the official plan that we're talking about today. And in the next slide, changes that we're looking to make to the official plan as part of our requirements. And it's about connecting growth and mobility. And so it's about where are we going to grow and how can we grow so that we are making, less car-dependent communities. And one of the ways we are required to do this is identifying what's called major transit station areas. So at the bottom left, what a major transit station area is, it's basically the area around an existing or planned transit station, about a 10-minute walk, or between 500 and 800 meters. The province sets out some minimum density targets for us. For subways, it's 200 people jobs per hectare. For light rail transit, like the Eglinton Crosstown, it's 160. And for GO stations, it's 150 people and jobs per hectare. And so on the right there, you'll see that at the end of this process, we will have identified over 180 of these across the city. Okay, the next slide. A subset of our 180, there's 6 or 7 of them here that have unique contexts, unique areas. If you've ever been on line 2 on the Bloor line, and you look outside the window and you're at Old Mill Station, you realize that the station is cantilevered over the Humber Valley. We won't be recommending any intensification within the Humber River Valley, but there are stations that do overlap with our natural heritage system, as you can see there. Okay, and on the next slide. And in discussing growth of both employment and residential, where some of the big questions that have been coming up as part of our discussions is how we can welcome new neighbors across the city and support more housing development where it currently lacks. What kinds of housing do we need in different communities? And what are the innovative solutions to ensure a sufficient supply of affordable housing? And we can get into that conversation in a bit. And where should we direct and prioritize affordable housing? And besides good access to transit and jobs, what are the other locational factors that we need to consider for complete communities? And the next slide just shows a couple of programs that are underway right now that are specifically looking at housing and the housing supply across the city. Housing Now is an initiative that the city's leveraging city-owned land to develop affordable housing. The Rapid Housing Initiative, the RHI, in partnership with the federal government, introduced and approved modular housing units in different parts of the city. Expanding housing options in neighborhoods is another one that we'll talk about. Multi-tenant or rooming houses is another initiative we're undertaking. Inclusionary zoning and laneway suites. Okay, in the next slide, we also have to ensure if we're planning for 2051, we're addressing climate change and planning for climate action. And so some of the issues we're looking at are on the left, but more importantly, what the experts are telling us is that Toronto's, daily temperature in 2050 is going to increase from 37 to 44 degrees. The number of hot days goes from 20 to 66. Extended heat waves goes from 0.6 to 2.5 per year, and the average rainfall also increases. So these are the long-term policy considerations that we've got to address in our updated official plan. And one way of doing this on the next slide is promoting and encouraging a culture of conservation. And what does this mean? These are, water conservation, initiatives to include efficient use and reuse of water, energy conservation, air quality improvement, managing excess soils. Again, these are initiatives that we are looking into to help translate into official policies that will be in our official plan. In the next slide, we're also looking at our employment areas. And remember when I did the 100 block city, I said that these purple lands, these employment areas, account to about 13% of our city. And they are located across city in different parts, strategically located for goods movement along our major highways, along the transit routes. So we are undertaking an examination of our employment trends pre and post COVID. We're looking at our office market, again, pre and post COVID, along with consulting with our employers, and our consultant from Hemson Consulting has joined us as well, who can take your questions. We're looking at what are called employment conversion requests as part of this process, which we received 150. And some really fun facts about our employment areas. So yeah, they account for 13% of all the lands, but house 25% of all the jobs, just over 400,000 jobs across the city. Okay, and I think the next one is my last slide. So although the province has given us a list of things that we have to do as part of this municipal comprehensive review, we're actually taking this as an opportunity to have bigger conversations, these type of conversations about balancing city building priorities, making sure that we're having conversations about transit, affordable housing, parks, recreation space, and many other things that, as Greg and the Deputy Mayor talked about, creating complete communities. And as I mentioned before, a plan for 2051 needs to be a plan that includes climate action. And we are centering our review on applying an equity lens to help direct this anticipated growth over the next 30 years. So, we do understand that there is systemic exclusion and displacement across the city. We do know that we have to plan for COVID rebuilding recovery. And as Greg mentioned earlier, how do we are asking ourselves and engaging with Indigenous organizations and treaty rights holders about how we can, as a city, integrate Indigenous reconciliation into our land use planning documents. And with that, I think I'm passing it back over to you, Marilyn.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jeff. That was a good overview. Before I do my piece, I want to ask you one quick question, Jeff, because it's come in through the chat, and we use the term a lot throughout the presentation, so probably helpful. Can you explain what you mean by intensification?
Yeah, so unlike other municipalities in the Greater Toronto Area, they have what's called an urban growth boundary, where they can just grow that urban growth boundary. We at the City of Toronto, we are fully built out, so the growth that we're going to experience is going to happen through intensification, which means revitalization of brownfields, like the former Downsview Airport is going to be closed down, and we're going to reuse that and create a plan for Downsview where that will include jobs and residents through intensification. The former Christie's lands in Etobicoke was once upon a time a cookie factory. And there will be a new transit station there and several residential towers and an office tower. And that is what I mean by intensification. We can't grow the city, therefore we're going to intensify the uses within the city.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. And there's lots of other questions already coming in through the chat. And we will, just for everyone's note, we will also get into conversations about housing and affordable housing. Deanna's already responding to some questions in the background, but maybe we can talk later about how the city is defining affordability as we go forward, because that is a hot topic. And I'll touch on that right now when I talk about what we've heard so far. So, to give everyone kind of a picture of where we are in this study and what this study, how the process works, there's kind of three parts to the technical work that the city is doing. And we are in the consultation program reflects those three parts. So we initially launched the project in the spring of this year, so earlier in 2021. And that was really around initial communications and outreach. There was some consultation internally with internal stakeholders at the city, kind of within divisions, because a lot of people and a lot of different groups at the city are involved in city building. So trying to understand the perspectives and the priorities there, but also doing some outreach within communities, with stakeholders, with community leaders, with Indigenous rights holders, et cetera, to kind of build an initial understanding and awareness. And then we're now at this kind of part two where we're really starting to brace these big questions around housing, around employment, sustainability, climate change, and that's where this conversation is plugging in. Following all the work that's happening right now, there's a lot of conversations that I'll give an outline on in a moment. The city is then going to take this information. So basically, the year of 2021 is a listening year, an effort to hear from people, to understand the perspectives and the issues, and then to go into the effort of setting policy direction, and then drafting some revisions to the official plan policy. In 2022, we will be coming out and having more consultation on the actual direction that the policies are taking based on the reflection of conversation that we've had so far. There is a lot of outreach happening. So on the bottom, you're seeing a number of avenues through which we are reaching out to folks. So we have the online stuff, the website. Hopefully many of you have been there. We're trying to use that in different ways. We do have a poll now, but there'll be more information on the website and different tools for interaction there. But we are having strategic conversations and direct outreach and making specific efforts to reach those that we don't always hear from in consultation. And that includes Indigenous community members who are rights holders, but also those who are not necessarily part of the local area rights holders, but Indigenous people who live and work here. We're reaching out to youth, and we have a youth engagement toolkit. I saw in the chat some interest in seeing more youth perspective. We agree, so we're going directly into schools and reaching out directly with students and young people across the city to get their perspectives on what they want to see for their future. We are meeting with the seniors strategy group and the accountability table on senior strategy for the city of Toronto to get that perspective. And we're bringing in community leaders. So reaching out to community leaders, I'll speak to that in a few moments. So trying to find a lot of different ways to connect with people and not just hosting a couple of these big public meetings, but doing it in a lot of kind of more grassroots, smaller scale outreach where we can. So we have, as part of that, is a stakeholder conversations, and we've had stakeholder meetings over the last few weeks, all on the topics that we're talking about today. Our stakeholders are made up of people from organizations and associations that relate to public realm and public space design, architecture, planning and community development, as well as environmental and community groups that are established, or research organizations, transportation and mobility groups. There's a number of key issues that relate to land use planning and transportation planning and the intersection of those things. Academia, policy and research organizations, those who are directly looking at the state of affairs in cities and what's needed for the future. Businesses and industry, business improvement areas and associations, as well as large business operators, and residential associations that are established, but also tenants associations representing the renters as well as ownership, and making sure that we have a cross representation of that. As I also mentioned, we have this community leaders circle that we've established, and the purpose of that is really to focus on the equity lens to all of these conversations and trying to reach people who are working directly with those who are at the margins, who are experiencing discrimination, who may be in communities that are underserved, that are racially discriminated or racialized within the community, and trying to reach out through organizations that work directly with those populations. And in this circle, it's really a conversation that's looking at the elements that we're all discussing: housing, growth, transportation, employment, sustainability, and understanding what are the issues that are affecting those that are struggling the most. that maybe in the lower income communities that need that may have a different perspective on the issues that need to be addressed across the city, and having those conversations together. So we have meetings coming up in November where we're actually going to be sharing all the feedback that we've had, including through this public consultation, with those community leaders to get their perspectives also on what the issues are. So as I mentioned, we launched the engagement in May, in the spring of 2021, to build awareness around the project. You may have seen some of the activity. There's been a video created that's been lots of opinions on that one. We've got public poll out right now. We've sent out project bulletins, had these initial meetings, and the folks you heard from earlier at the beginning of this meeting, Deputy Mayor Bailau and Chief Planner Greg Lintern, were on an episode of The Agenda to kind of build awareness and help people understand what we're looking at. So we're in this moment now of further conversations to get us into an understanding of the deeper concerns and issues. So with that, I want to share a few things that we've heard so far. So some people, if you've been part of our stakeholder meetings, would have seen this already, but this is a word cloud around a question that we've been asking through all of these conversations about: what do people want Toronto to be in 2051? Toronto in 2051 is, and they fill this in, and we've compiled all of the answers. So in the word cloud, the larger the word, the more we heard it. The more we heard that what people want is to be a sustainable city, an equitable city, an accessible, an affordable, and a green city, an inclusive city, a walkable city. We've also heard the flip side of that conversation, which is also on the concern base, that we're concerned that Toronto in 2051 will be overdeveloped, will be lacking infrastructure, will be underwater. And so it's trying to hear both of those stories of both what people want the city to be and how they would like to see that come to fruition, but also what they're really concerned the city could become if the city planning team doesn't really focus on some of these big issues that we tackle. So I know there was a question in the chat about, are we sharing the slides? We will be making all this material available. So I encourage you, because some of this font is really tiny, I encourage you to look at those slides afterwards and see the range of perspectives that we're getting through all of these conversations. In terms of the big themes that we've heard, we have heard cross-cutting themes across every conversation around equity, inclusion, and relationship building, and wanting those to be a priority. Around community-led solutions, focusing on the community perspective for not the one size fits all, but the community-led perspective to the solutions. Aligning the priorities and conversations that we're having, and also with other conversations taking place across the city. There's lots of consultation happening right now around growth in the city, and to line up those conversations is helpful. And then learning from the past and dealing with implementation. A lot of commentary around, the plan may be there or the vision may be there, but the implementation isn't happening. And so how to line that up. And then the topics of focus that people are really interested in and have come forward are housing affordability, addressing the scale of intensification, both from those who want to see more and those who also are afraid that the scale is going to overwhelm their community. Environment and climate change, wanting to see climate action, transit growth, and just transit connectivity overall, transportation connectivity. Business and economy, how we support businesses, both small, medium, and large businesses, especially with COVID recovery. Safety has been raised a number of times in conversations, both general public safety, road safety, dealing with, for those who are familiar with Vision Zero, trying to reduce road conflicts, but also safety for women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are experiencing concerns of safety in communities across the city. And then public realm design and the supply and access to recreational space and public space, and how that's distributed and kind of an equitable experience for people across the city. So diving into that a bit, the biggest challenges that have been identified for the city to address: environment, climate change, and sustainability are definitely rising to the top, along with housing, and housing in terms of both affordability and all levels of affordability, from deep affordability to more market affordable, as well as the general supply of housing, the types of housing, and the access to that supply. So dealing with multi-generational housing and family housing, as well as smaller scale housing, and what the options are to provide for affordability as well. Equity, as I as I mentioned, inclusivity as well as accessibility for those with disabilities and improving accessibility across the city. And then addressing discrimination, and the city has lots of information around what they're doing in this effort towards equity and anti-discrimination efforts. And then process, so how equity is dealt with through process and through implementation. There's also a desire to achieve healthy and resilient communities across the city. I think one thing we are hearing is that people feel like there's an imbalance. There may be complete and healthy communities in some locations, but it's not everywhere. And how we do that, how the city can do that better in COVID recovery, as I mentioned earlier. I won't go through everything on this list. I encourage you to look at that, but I do want to note that what I'm providing here is a snapshot of the the things that have come to the top the most through these conversations so far. We've also had a public poll, and hopefully many of you who are on the meeting today have been part of that public poll and participated. We encourage you, it's still open, so there'll be links provided after the meeting to fill that in if you haven't. But we've had about 800 responses so far, and you'll see a map on the left of your screen that shows the geography of those responses. We are trying to reach outside of the downtown and get more folks from Etobicoke, Scarborough, North York, East York to participate as well. We're making that concerted effort where we can. 60% of the participants so far have been ages 26 to 45. So we are getting some of the younger voices as well, and people who are going to be seeing the city evolve over time. 20% are visible minority or self-identify as part of a visible minority. 16% of the respondents have identified as 2S LGBTQ+ people in the city. 51% of the respondents have identified as male, 45% as female, and 4% as non-binary or other. And so the results that we're getting from this participation is that the top 5 issues, this is reflecting what we've actually, same thing that we are hearing in the stakeholder conversations we're seeing in this public poll, which is top 5 issues that people want addressed by the city are affordable housing and access to a range of housing types, access to transit and transportation options across the city, green spaces, ravines and parks, access to, but also support for and protection of these spaces, addressing climate change and climate action, and then added here, which didn't come up as much in the stakeholder meetings, but we have heard for sure, is cycling and pedestrian connections and building those out across the city equally so that those in Scarborough and those in Etobicoke, and then it's not just concentrated in the downtown. In terms of what people value in their communities, so on the things that people want to see more of that they have in their communities, want to see encouraged is access to transit. There are many people who are participating who do have good access to transit right now. Again, the green spaces, trees, ravines, trees in particular, people really loving the trees in their neighborhoods, and Toronto is known for some of that. So really protecting that and encouraging that as we grow out. Cycling and walking, again, people in the neighborhoods that they are participating in have good access to that. Small businesses and local shops, the main street personality of the city, we're hearing a lot about that. And then diversity, wanting to encourage and support the diversity and the range of culture that we see across the city in different neighborhoods. So we've heard a lot. And the best way I can sum it up is that it is a really wide range of perspectives, and it completely depends on where you're sitting. And, this is just a snapshot of that if you're in the boat, you want the land. And if you're on land, you want that boat. And so we're hearing a broad range, and we really, it's helping us build this conversation of the things that the city needs to tackle on these differences of perspectives. And honestly, I will tell you, as I'm on the consultation side of things, for those who are writing this work, it is a challenge, and it will be a big mountain for the city to climb to manage the different opinions and how to address all of that through the work that they're doing. So a summary of key issues here. I won't go through them, but I think that it's really important to highlight this, that we are seeing that many people are raising the same concerns. Some of the things that we've talked about in the intensification lens, so that piece that people are asking about, in growing, as the city grows, there is a desire to make sure that the city considers all of the housing needs and the job needs of those that are both here now, but also those that aren't at these meetings, the future population that is coming and what their needs may be, but then also understanding and reflecting on how that may impact the communities that are here now and the communities that moved into their neighborhoods because they love those neighborhoods. And so how the city balances all of that growth in this conversation is a big piece that is something for the city to weigh and to think through as they draft policies going forward. So with that, we're actually going to have a bit of a panel discussion now. And we have a number of panelists joining us, some key people from the city. I am going to stop sharing my screen now so that you can all see the panelists that are here today. And hopefully you can all turn on your cameras, folks who are on the panelists team. So joining us, we have Jeff Cantos. He did the earlier presentation from the OP team. We have Deanna Chorney, who's here from housing, and we'll talk to some of the housing issues. We have Greg Ewens, who's here from the Chief Planner's Office, and also talking about some of the initiatives that the city is addressing in intensification studies. We also have Josh Weiss, who's here on the environmental team, who will provide some perspective from that, and a number of people also who may get called in as we go. Feel free for the staff team, panelist team to call on those that you want to help support any questions. But I have a number of questions to pose to the panelists. The questions that I prepared here are based on some of the questions we've already received so far and what we're hearing. So trying to get to these questions that may be coming up in the chat already as we go. So the first question, I'm going to direct this to Jeff first, but probably Greg and then Deanna will weigh in after Jeff's made some comments. So the first question, people have raised significant concerns related to the cost of housing throughout the city. Much of the concerns stem from people feeling like there is not enough housing supply and that much more housing is needed in all neighborhoods across the city in order to increase access to affordable housing options. What is the city thinking of doing to address the supply of all types of housing across the city? So Jeff, can I give that to you first?
Yeah, sure. I'll take the first stab and pass it over to Greg and Deanna. But yeah, the city in city planning, we do recognize the need for more of all housing types. We do understand, we need to encourage and support and recognize, the need for multi-generational homes and the role that they play in helping, caregiving for children, housing for youth. Essential worker housing. This is a COVID term that we've all recognized to make sure that affordable housing are near to jobs, and they are in the city of Toronto, so people don't have to move far out to be able to enjoy a good quality of life that hopefully the city can continue to provide. As the province does give us these minimum density targets that we usually far surpass these targets, but the important part of this process is how do we grow? How do we grow equitably? How do we ensure that we're using and applying a climate change lens into the future growth? But I'm going to pass it off to Greg. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Jeff. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm working on, along with a number of staff at the city, a study called Expanding Housing Options in Neighborhoods, and which looks to introduce a number of different forms of housing, primarily what you think of as missing middle housing, into areas across the city. It's currently very challenging for people in many situations to find housing in the city, especially in neighborhoods. And this is in part because it can be difficult to build the type of housing that's suited to a lot of people's needs. So we're looking at different types of housing, and many of them look a lot like what's already there already, but they're critical in addressing the city's needs with regard to housing, which is perhaps the greatest that they've ever been. These are housing for, like Jeff said, a range of household and family structures, people at different ages, incomes, abilities, housing options for people to move into and around within neighborhoods, for empty nesters who might want to build a garden suite or a laneway suite in the backyard, stay in their community while downsizing, for young families who may want to rent a 2 or 3 bedroom unit in a converted house so they can be close to their friends, the school, daycare, for the person who serves your coffee in the morning so they don't have to commute an hour and a half from where they can afford to live. I see comments, and I see them in chat, and I'm reading chat about building over highways, over railways, and other suggestions, and they're interesting suggestions. But I often hear these as an alternative to growing housing in the city's neighborhoods, which is, in my view, a much more impactful way to grow from a perspective of equity climate resiliency, and growing complete communities. I also hear that infill housing is at odds with our goals to grow the city's tree canopy and green space. I don't see these as mutually exclusive goals. We can do both. You know, the neighborhoods in the city present many opportunities for growth, adding units to existing buildings, building new multi-unit housing, low-rise apartments, laneway suites, garden suites, stuff, as I said, that's often called missing middle housing. And this is housing which is similar in scale to a lot of what's there, but accommodates more people and, critically, a greater variety of incomes, household structures, ages, and abilities. Neighborhood intensification is also an important way for cities to combat have an impact on climate change. So we're considering and consulting on policy and zoning changes to support this type of housing in a variety of formats across the city. If you haven't, please sign up for the mailing list so you get updates on consultation and other stuff that we do on expanding housing options. The website is toronto.ca/EHON. I'll post it in the chat. There's also a survey on multiplex housing that we launched this week. Please take some time to fill that out if you like. Expanding housing options has a lot of overlap with the other themes that we'll discuss in this meeting and at the MCR generally. It's a housing initiative, yes, but it's also as much an equity and a climate initiative. So I'll turn it over to Deanna.
Thanks, and hi, everyone. So I want to talk a little bit about what the city is doing around affordable housing. So certainly what Jeff and Greg talked about is critical in terms of providing a diversity of housing supply. The city has also taken a number of initiatives around really tackling our affordable housing challenges and crisis. So in 2019, as Mary-Elise mentioned, City Council adopted our 10-year housing action plan, which is a multi-pronged approach to address housing affordability. So as part of this work, the city has committed an estimated $8.5 billion over 10 years to help support housing for over 341,000 households, including creating 40,000 new affordable rental units and 4,000 affordable ownership units. Some of the work we're doing in city planning specifically in terms of updates to our official plan are advancing two critical policies. The first is to bring forward an inclusionary zoning policy, and the second is updating our definitions of affordable housing, which I saw in the chat. There was some question about what we talk about when we mean that. We will be bringing forward both those reports to October 28th Planning and Housing Committee, and we're having a public open house actually tomorrow evening that you're all welcome to join, which will go over in detail our proposed approaches on inclusionary zoning and new definitions of affordable housing. So just a snapshot, inclusionary zoning will create baseline affordable housing requirements for new developments close to transit across the city, requiring to begin with 5 to 10% of units as affordable in the first few years of the policy, and increasing that rate to 8 to 22% by 2030. And this will really be part of our overall approach in terms of, you know, also looking at leveraging city-owned land, producing modular housing, and so on. It's one tool as part of the affordable housing toolbox. The second piece of work that we're doing is looking at our definitions of affordable housing. We know that market-based approaches to defining affordable housing are really out of step with the needs of low and moderate income households. And so our new definitions will tie affordable rents and prices to what is affordable to those household incomes instead of solely to market prices and rents. So we've looked at what key workers can afford. For instance, a family of 4 with 2 income earners as an early childhood educator and a bank clerk would be able to afford our proposed affordable 3-bedroom unit, rent for a 3-bedroom unit, and affordable ownership price for a 2-bedroom unit. So really looking at making sure that the folks who you know, serve our city well and are part of our city are able to afford housing.
Okay. Thanks, Deanna. And I think I saw, you know, my follow-up question was about rental, but really what you're talking about is both ownership and rental in those approaches. I know some people have been asking about the definitions, so we'll have to get some links there for folks so that they can find information on those definitions, because it's probably best to be able to see that written out to get all those numbers as a reminder. So thanks for that. So we have a poll question. I'm just going to get Zara to launch this poll, and we'll continue the panel discussion as you have this poll. But this question is about your housing concerns. So considering your current life stage, what are you most interested in for the coming year? So this question is, A, having rental options that you and or your friends and family can afford. B, having ownership options that you and or your friends can afford. And C, both. Interested to know if there's more interest in the ownership or the rental world, or maybe it's just an overall desire to see all of that improved. So we'll allow folks a moment here to submit those. And while you do that, I'm gonna ask the next question. I'm gonna direct this to Josh. And Zara, if you can just close that poll in a moment or two, that would be great. So Josh, this question is related to the climate change stuff that people are raising as one of their primary concerns. So the city has declared a climate emergency, and this summer we had multiple days where the temperature was over 40 degrees Celsius. What is the city doing to reduce the heat impacts in areas across Toronto? And if you can you identify if there are areas in the city that need more attention to address the heat island effects?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a very important question, and certainly is one of the main contexts of this official plan review. As Jeff mentioned in his presentation off the top, we're looking at forward to 2050. We know that this city is going to get a lot hotter, weather's going to get a lot wilder, and the existing conditions today, while we are seeing very high temperatures throughout the summer, are more than likely going to get a lot worse. So that idea of urban heat island is something that today's official plan, the existing official plan, certainly addresses in some ways. And as we're looking ahead a few decades, it's something that we need to make sure that we're capturing in this official plan, this MCR. The biggest piece in terms of managing heat in the city is our protection of the natural heritage system. So the city's green space, open system, that's, for the most part, those are ravines, our large parks, our small parks. Having green space and a tree canopy does a lot of good in helping to cool temperature. If you ever see a heat map of the city, you'll see that through our ravine systems, that's where locally we're seeing far cooler temperatures throughout the summer. It's in those urbanized areas where there's little tree cover that we're seeing the effects of urban heat island, and that 40-degree air temperature is feeling much, much hotter in the urban spaces than it is if you get down into our ravines. So we do have policies in today's official plan that does address this. In terms of harnessing new development, we have the Toronto Green Standard, which promotes and requires new development to have trees along street frontages, to have adequate soil volume to be able to maintain those trees along our streets. We also require the use of different type of paving materials that would actually, create lighter materials so that there's more reflectivity and it holds less heat. So trying to reduce the impacts of the urban heat island. We also have a green roof bylaw that requires new development to have a green roof, depending on the size of the building. That again has a large impact in reducing that. Within neighborhoods and other parts of the city, the zoning bylaw requires certain percentages of soft landscaping. So again, making sure that we have green spaces that's permeable, can accept stormwater, and also our tree protection bylaws. So that's kind of answering the first part of your question. The second part, a tree canopy study conducted by Urban Forestry, we know that there are different parts of the city that have very different amounts of tree cover, and associated with that include the urban heat island effect. So looking at that mapping, understanding the discrepancy across the city, the inequity of tree cover across the city is something that Urban Forestry is actively working to address, and certainly something that the official plan does and will continue to support. So I think that answers kind of most of the question. As we look at some of our larger sites that the city is redeveloping, and again, Jeff mentioned some of them off the top, Christie's being an example, the Portlands down by the waterfront, another example. We're starting to integrate more official plan or more secondary plan policies that bring forward this idea of kind of a climate positive solution. So looking more at green infrastructure, green streets to try to integrate that to reduce heat and more generally to create a more resilient, adaptable city.
Okay, so some of the things we're hearing, and you can see it in the chat now, but we've also heard before, is that as the city continues to build and site by site, there's impacts to trees in each site and the protection at that small scale, it does, you know, some community members don't feel like it's there. And so I guess the question to you is what the approach really is, you know, in protecting those trees as the city builds out.
Yeah, so again, so I haven't been able to track the comments as I've been talking, but I think that that's something that's certainly, so I sit on the environment team within city planning, and we are very actively thinking about that. I'll let Greg kind of jump in as well, because through the expanding housing options, I know that they're considering that as we're looking at infill. I think the perspective that we're holding, or the context that we're holding, is knowing that if we're going to bring more intensification, you know, as Jeff said, mostly around our major transit station areas, that's one side of the climate change mitigation strategy, trying to get people out of cars, trying to reduce our carbon impact, trying to do infill at a smaller scale or at different scales to have less embodied carbon in our structures. The flip side of that is of course maintaining and trying to adapt to climate change. So having more green surfaces, having large parks protecting our natural heritage, having more trees is something that can't get lost in that conversation. Finding that balance between bringing more people to the city and maintaining that green space is an important policy discussion, important thing that we need to address.
Okay.
Also, parking Toronto kind of in that broader regional context. We know that all the municipalities across the Greater Golden Horseshoe are going through a similar process, creating a new MCR right now. Many of those municipalities are thinking about expanding their urban boundaries into prime farmland, natural areas. Policies that the City of Toronto can create to maximize infill development both help to bring some of the population into an already built up area, but also can be used by those other urban municipalities to try to reduce their need to expand outwards. So finding those solutions between maintaining our tree cover, expanding our tree canopy, and bringing infill into neighborhoods is a really important discussion, and certainly something that through this MCR we're looking to address head on.
Okay. Okay. I know if we get time, if a question comes up more later, we might come back to this one, seeing the activity in the chat. But I'm going to move on to the next question I have, so that we can open up the conversation too. So Jeff, this question is for you, and this is more on the economic side of things, the jobs stuff. So through consultation, we've heard that many people want the city to grow by more than the province has forecasted. Oh, sorry, this is more on the growth, the intensification. People have identified that more growth within the city will help to reduce the impacts of suburban sprawl, which is what Josh was just talking about, increase the efficient use of infrastructure in the city, and support economic growth and help make the city more affordable. There are concerns about that growth being too much as well. But is the city considering planning for growth beyond what's been identified by the province?
Thanks for the question, Marlies. So I think I mentioned this earlier, that the province does set minimums. So 700,000 is a minimum that we have to demonstrate that we have a plan in place for, and the Minister of Municipal Affairs Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing is the minister who would approve this municipal comprehensive review. And we know that when the province sets these minimums, the city far surpasses them. You know, our plan actually generally surpasses these minimums, but our homework for the province is to demonstrate that we have a plan for those numbers. And we do understand that going too low on these numbers does actually encourage sprawl outside of Toronto into the 905. We do know that. We work very closely. I work very closely with my counterparts in our neighboring municipalities. So it is a bit of a coordinated effort.
Okay, fair enough. We're gonna launch a poll question here, because I know this is one of the hot topics in this chat, and interested to see on this note of growth, do you think the city needs to grow by even more than currently being planned for? Option A is I want to see more. Option B, I want to see less. Option C, I'm not sure yet. So that's a public poll question. Again, you can open your polls by pressing the 3 dots at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and you'll see polling. You can open that up. You'll also see it on your phone. If you're watching from your phone, again, you open up those 3 dots, and polling is one of the options. You can submit your question there and see what interest there is in the varying perspectives that we have around the table. And as that goes on, I'm going to direct another question to you, Jeff. This one is on the economic side of things. So people have raised concerns that the ongoing changes in employment with more people working from home is resulting in empty office towers, quiet business parks, and underutilized employment areas. Does this mean that the city can rethink the employment land uses and the office areas to support other uses, potentially including housing?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So there are 2 things there. In terms of remember on my slide deck, the purple lands, the employment areas that are 13% of the city. So those are the lands where only certain employment uses can go. We can't put some of what we call, the essential services right smack dab in the middle of in the middle of neighborhoods. So these lands play a role for accommodating, manufacturing, distribution, processing uses that can only, again, be located in these employment areas. And we do know that these lands and these jobs that these manufacturers, distributors, processors, what they provide jobs that are low barrier entry for newcomers to Toronto who, more often than not, don't have their professional credentials acknowledged here in Canada straight away. So the purple lands, the 13% of the city that I was talking about, play an important role for providing employment and economic opportunity for newcomers. And so in terms of the office, and the future of office, given, our work from home, I'm calling you in from my kitchen. This is something that we are looking at. We do have our consultants, Hempson. Adam from Hempson is here. So if there's any specific questions on that, when we go to live questions, he can take those. But yes, something that we are actively researching and looking into, what is the future of the office in Toronto.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so we are going to open this up for conversation, and we know we've got lots of questions in the chat. We're also going to have people be able to ask questions verbally. I'm going to just share my screen again to remind folks how to raise your hand. So you use the raise hand function if you'd like to ask a question verbally, and I'll go through the list. Daniel is helping me. He'll unmute the folks as you have your question. Again, the raise hand function you should be able to see here. If you're on your phone, you open those 3 dots and you'll see a raise hand little icon at the top to be able to ask. And then same if you're on a computer or a laptop or tablet, you open your participants tab and you'll be able to see under the attendee list at the bottom, you'll see a little hand, and you should be able to raise your hand by selecting that. So we encourage you to do so. And I will stop sharing my screen again. I find it helpful to be able to look at the panelists when you're having the conversation. Unfortunately, we can't get folks, you'll be able to ask your question verbally, but you won't be able to turn your camera on just due to some of the limitations of the technology. So we do ask though that you keep your question, try to keep your question to 1 question if you can. And we've got lots of hands up, so we have lots of people to get through, and try to keep your question concise for the team, and we'll get to it as much as we can. So unfortunately, we have run out of time. And I would just say on that last comment, we'll add notes about, supporting affordable studio spaces, cultural spaces, etc., as part of that piece of the consultation. I want to thank everyone for spending the last 2 hours with us in the middle of your day. I really appreciate that. We do have the same conversation and meeting happening again this evening, trying to give people as many opportunities to attend and participate as possible. Please share broadly if you have neighbors, friends, family that you think should contribute to this conversation or hear what we're talking about, encourage them to come tonight at 5 o'clock. We'll put up again our website, toronto.ca/ourplan, for people to go there and find out more. Make sure you've signed up for getting any notices, be on the contact list so that as things come out, you get updated. Jeff, any final comments before we say thank you to everyone and sign off?
You know, it's just really a thanks for everyone for participating, and I get it. There are a lot of meetings. We are undertaking a lot of things that, you know, Torontonians are and you guys are interested in. So we do appreciate your time on this project that we're undertaking. So thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks
Thanks,
very
Mike.
much, everyone. Say good night.